The reason I picked this, Ruth, first I felt the Lord kind of leading me to challenge you, but we're going to be looking at Ruth as one of these threads of these characters in the Scripture, these men and women who serve God faithfully. Not really special in any big way. They were people just like you and me, and yet God used them in wonderful ways. And so we're going to look at the book of Ruth today and see this thread of commitment, of loyalty that God weaves through the book of Ruth. Now, I don't know if you watch the news, but over the last few years, we've noticed a lot of migration of peoples. You know, in America, there's a big, immigrants and all that stuff, and people coming, and they're basically coming because where they live now, they're poor. And they go, we can get more if we come to the United States. There'll be opportunities. Europe, they're leaving Africa and the Middle East in droves because of economics, because of political and religious pressures, all that kind of stuff. But they're moving. But I just want you to know that that kind of migration isn't anything new. In fact, we read in the first couple chapters of Scripture that the Lord initiated the first migration. He kicked Adam and Eve out of the garden and said, don't come back. So here, the book of Ruth is set in one of those times, and we heard it, where there is this migration. And if we look at that first verse of the book, we read, in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. Now, Moab is just across the river, the Jordan River, from Israel. But it's a mountainous region, and it's much more fertile than where Israel is, and there's a lot more rain. So even though there's a famine in Israel, they've got enough water to survive. They go there, their boys marry, we heard it, the boys die, and now they're stuck. The 3 women are stuck because there's no men. And in that culture, you have to have a guy. Sorry, ladies, in that culture, you needed a guy. The guy provided the stability, provided the economic wealth, provided a connection to society and to family that the women couldn't do by themselves. But they hear, there's food back in Israel, and they pick up and they move back home. But when Naomi gets there, it's not as good. But along the way, Naomi goes, hey, daughters, Orpah and Ruth, this is going to be tough for you. Why don't you just go back home to your own families, because you're not going to be accepted in Israel. It's going to be a hard road for you there, so just kind of stay there. But Orpah goes, yeah, you're right, and heads back home. But Ruth says no. And she says, in the words of verses 16 and 17, one of the most beautiful expressions of commitment and loyalty found in any literature anywhere in the world. It's found right here in the book of Ruth. And look at these verses together. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you from me. I'd like all of us, can you go back a couple slides, please, to the beginning of that verse, 16? Yes. I want you to read where it starts, says, where you go, I will go. Will you read those verses just together? Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. Sometimes those words are used in a marriage ceremony today because They're so meaningful. I'd like you to just, if you're married, just kind of look at your spouse right now and smile. We're not going to take time to say those words together, but I want you purposely to look at your spouse. If you're married, they're here. Look at them and go, yes, those words. Okay? Here, Ruth is going to Naomi, you're my family. We would do this today, wouldn't we? Right? We do that cultural, I'm looking at you, gotcha, you're on the same page. I am going with you, this is a done deal, there's no way we're stopping. That's what Naomi's doing, and of course, that's what happens. Ruth and Naomi stay together and they go back. But oftentimes, when people go back home and there's been grief, going back home brings the grief back up. You know, the familiar places where Naomi and her husband and her two boys had lived, had walked, had played, all those familiar things of life. Naomi goes back and she's reminded of what she's lost when she goes back home. And she says, hey, don't call me Naomi anymore. Name me Mara. I'm bitter. I have lost so much. And in the midst of that grief, she does what a lot of people do, is to blame God. She points her finger and says, God did this to me. Anybody ever walk with someone through grief and hear them blame God? I have. Many, many times. People, it's your fault. God could have stopped it. God could have healed. God could have prevented that tragedy. God could have. I just want to encourage you to not try and answer. Next time you run into that, don't try and say, but, or any, just silence. God's shoulders are big enough to handle our struggles in the midst of grief. So next time you're walking with someone who's in the midst of grief and loss and suffering, just put a zipper over your lip. Don't try and answer them. Just be with them. God is big enough to handle the grief. I think I missed one of the points, didn't I? That God's commitment has no limits. That was one of those slides. Oh, it's right there on the screen, isn't it? Commitment has no. So that's those words. Naomi, Ruth is saying to Naomi, no matter what you die, I'm going to die there. Live, go, whatever it is, no limits. I'm going that direction. So they move and they're trying to figure out now how are we going to live, because they're two women without the financial means and support. And so chapter 2, verse 2, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So here we see that commitment takes investment. Commitment's going to cost you something. If you say, I'm committed to the Lord, I'm committed to my spouse, I'm committed to this church, I'm committed to my job, I'm committed to whatever, to running, to scuba diving, to skydiving, to collecting stamps, it's going to cost you something. And that's what Ruth says. I'm going to go and work. I'm going to go out and collect grain. Now that's strange because we don't collect grain, do we? We go to the store and we buy it in this nice little bag or box. But back then they had to go out to the field and they had to cut. And that since they don't own a field, the law provided that they could walk behind the people who were harvesting, and they were allowed to pick up the leftovers off the ground. And that's what was allowed. So that's what she says, that's what I'm going to do. That is hard work. Picking up the leftovers in a field that's being harvested. Ruth is going, I'm committed to you, Naomi. I care about your welfare, that I'm going to go out and work, and this is going to be hard work. Picking up small pieces of grain that are left over. Small stalks of grain that have been dropped. So she went out into the field and began to glean behind the harvesters As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. That's the same clan as her father-in-law. You know, there's no coincidences when you serve the Lord. There's no accidents. There are things that happen that are in our lives because there is evil in the world. But God knew about that, and He's going to use even that bad thing for His glory. He's going to use that tragedy to work on our character. He's going to use that hip that doesn't work anymore, that bothers me every day. He's going to use that for His glory. And so here, she just goes out and she ends up in the right person's field. Not bad. She's out there investing in providing, and God does a great thing. Verse 10, at this she bowed down with her face to the ground, because Boaz recognizes that she's out there working, that she's doing a hard thing, and he recognizes her and offers her protection. A powerful thing for a young woman in a foreign land, to be offered protection by an honorable man. And that's exactly what Boaz does. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you notice me, a foreigner?" She knows that she's kind of on the bottom of the pecking order. And she's kind of okay with that. She knows that she doesn't deserve, that she has no right to ask for something. She's out working hard. She's putting her energy in. She's living by the rules. She's doing what she's supposed to do to honor God and to honor her mother-in-law. And she goes, "Why do you give me such special treatment?" And Boaz replies, "I have been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." So Boaz knows of the sacrifice, the cost she's already paid. I want to ask a question. What's the cost that you are paying for serving Jesus today? What's being a Christian costing you? What's being a faithful follower of Christ or a disciple of Christ here in Okinawa? What's that costing you? Maybe it's too convenient for you, too easy. Commitment, loyalty costs something. Jesus is going to ask us for something today. And we need to be willing and obedient and be willing to pay that cost. So Boaz has heard about Ruth's commitment, her life, her character, and he says, "I'm going to bless you." And so he says, "May the Lord bless you." And he pronounces this wonderful blessing on her, that she be rewarded, that she be repaid for her faithfulness. And Ruth responds by saying, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants." So Ruth acknowledges the kindness. She knows this is out of the ordinary, and she just says, "Wow, this is too much, Lord. I don't get this. Why are you being so nice? Thank you for being so nice." So Ruth, within a matter of hours, has gone from this desperate single woman, widowed, no family, no means of support, and now, because the Lord is in it, she now has someone who's providing for her, who says, "Come and glean in the field. Come and partake." Because when we honor that investment that she makes, which is what Boaz does, then God can do great things in our life. We recognize that God is at work. And that's exactly what Boaz has done in providing for her. So she goes home and She has all this grain that she's gotten, way more than she should have. And she comes and she brings it home and shows it to Naomi. And Naomi, where did you work? How'd you get this much? Because normally you're just picking up. You're lucky if you get enough for today. And here she goes home with this great big bushel of grain. Several weeks worth of grain for the two of them. And Naomi goes, "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She's talking about Elimelech, about Boaz. He's shown kindness to their family. She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers, kinsman redeemers." Now, it's unknown who this person is. We don't have, excuse me, I'm jumping ahead. Neither of them knew where she was going to end up, and yet she ended up there. And in the process, do you hear Naomi's hope rising? All of a sudden, she doesn't seem as desperate. Look at this grain! Look what God provides, and Boaz, woohoo! He's one of our kids. He's a relative. How did that happen? Wow. And you can hear her hope rising in the process. Now this term, this close relative, this kinsman redeemer, this guardian redeemer, that is the translation of the NIV, this was really a picture of the Lord himself. The guardian, the kinsman redeemer, we find out in Jesus, was the one who would pay the price, who would provide protection, who would provide provision. Same back then, the guardian redeemer was one who would take a desperate situation. There was no man to carry on the name. And if the woman died, the wife died without a kid, without a male child especially, guess what? The property went away. Their name died. Nobody wants their name to die, and yet that's exactly what happened. So a kinsman redeemer would come along and keep the family name alive. Keep it going. Provide for the women, for provision for those widows, those who were desperate. The kinsman redeemer would bring them under their household and provide for them. And now we've got Boaz, who's a wonderful, generous, gentle, caring man, and he's saying to Naomi and Ruth, I'm going to take care of you. Wow. He's got a great reputation too, which is wonderful. Anybody who moves around, anybody ever move in life from one place to another, from one job to another, from one relationship to another? You know, most of us have moved, you know, our reputation generally goes before us. Before you even arrive, especially in the military, before you even arrive, they already know you. They've looked at your paperwork, haven't they? And you walk in the door, and probably chances are your new boss has talked already with your old boss. And they know the good things about you, and they probably know some of the bad things too. Here, Boaz has this wonderful reputation, and it's gone ahead of him. Verse 23, chapter 2 closes and says, So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. She lived with her mother-in-law. Chapter 3, one day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, My daughter, I must find a home for you, where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose women you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. In other words, he's getting rid of all the chaff, all the stalks, and ending up with just the grain you can eat. That's what winnowing does. Wash, put on perfume, get dressed in your best clothes, get all gussied up, the old-fashioned way of saying that, get all pretty, you know, put the makeup on, put on the nice styling shoes, make sure you've got it all together. That's modern language, but that's what she's saying to her daughter-in-law. Then go down to the threshing floor, and don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. That's a strange thing. Think about that. I mean, is that the way we do dating now? I hope the singles who came to the singles workshop, is that the way we date? You know, you like the guy, so you find out where he's sleeping, right? And then after he's asleep, you sneak in and you pull back the covers down by his feet and you stick your feet under his covers, right? Is that how we date? No, but that was part of the only way that a woman could go, hey, baby, I like you. And that's what Naomi is proposing to Ruth. Go to this old guy, because he is older, much older in fact. And I want you to kind of propose to him. Make yourself available to him. Now, back then, we didn't have the nice wedding chapels we have on Okinawa, right? Where you can pay all that money and get the really fancy, right? And do they do horse-drawn carriages here in Okinawa? Just limousines, no, maybe, you know. But get the pictures in that great big wedding chapel. And, no. They could go, hey, you want to get married? And they'd say, yeah. And mom and dad might be involved, might not be involved. Oftentimes they were, but it was a very much less. So her going in and saying, I'm putting my feet under your covers, she's going, hey, I'm available. Not exactly the way. Head and heart, right? Right? You single folks who came to the seminar, head and heart. Here's an honorable man. He can take care of me. Head. He's also really kind and compassionate. He has done things for me and taken care of me in ways that I could never imagine. Head and heart. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. Not exactly what he expected. Who are you? He asked. He didn't know. It's dark. There's no floodlights, no night light in the corner, no cell phone that he could hold up to light the way, right? I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family. Hey, marry me. It's exactly what she's saying. I want to be your wife. I want you to provide the covering for me. I want to become part of your household. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. So you got to remember that the women didn't have a lot of rights on their own. Rights for a woman in that culture were primarily brought to her because of her relationship to family, to men. Different than ours, we go, that's terrible. Right? Come on, we're women. We have rights, right? But here, God provided wonderful protection. Now, I don't know about you, but I worry about Bev sometimes. I do. She's strong. She can take, but there are times, like when she goes out and does something at night, I worry about her. I want her to be safe. Guys, do you ever worry about your wives? You want your woman to be safe? Ladies, do you ever feel like at moments, just short moments, just 2 or 3 seconds at a time, that you wish you had a big, strong man there to protect you? Just for 2 or 3 seconds, not all of your life. Okay, I wouldn't ask that much. But you know, there are moments where you're walking out dark alley and you go, man, I'd love to have some big guy there to provide me. There's times where I'm walking in a dark alley and I wish I had a big, strong. Never mind, I guess. You know, they're all, and here God provided for the safety and security of the women through the men. So don't buck against it. That's just the way it was culturally. Verse 11, and now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. I wish we could all say, I wish we could all hear, I wish that we could all be men and women of noble character, like Ruth and Boaz. That's what God is calling us to be. If we're going to be effective people making disciples in Okinawa, we need to be godly men and women, reflecting his character here in this world. So Naomi waits till morning. She gets up, she goes home. Boaz has provided her just an abundance of grain, and she gets back home, and Naomi says, "Wow! What do we do next?" And Naomi says, "Wait." So, kind of, the next thing is that commitment involves risk. I mean, we see the risk that that Ruth played by going there in the middle of the night. There could have been a scandal. What were you doing there on the grain? Woo-hoo! What kind of woman are you going there in the middle of the night? Same thing as today. But she risked. That's why Boaz was so careful to send her out properly, without anybody seeing her. So Boaz steps up and he goes to the elders of the town, and today you are witnesses. He grabs the closer relative who stays unnamed and says, "Hey, today you are witness." Oh, that's not what I want. Oh yeah, they pull them and they get the men of the town together and they have court. And they go, "Do you want to buy the property of your close relative?" And the guy says, "Sure, I'll take the property." And Boaz goes, "Oh, there's one catch. There's this woman, Ruth. You're going to have to take her too, which means you have an obligation to have a son. And when that son is born, he's not going to be your son anymore. He's going to belong over there. He's going to take their name and carry on that line rather than your line." And the guy goes, that might mess things up legally. I don't know whether I want another wife. So, no, I don't want her. And they do something really fun is they take off their shoe, right? And they exchange shoes. Here, seal the deal. So now from now on, you're wearing somebody else's shoe. Kind of weird custom, right? But that's how they seal the contract. And God is really good because they take this risk. He goes before the people of the town. He says, "Hey, this is what's going on." And Boaz steps up and says, "I will do it. I'll be that man of integrity. I will commit. I will be loyal, and I'll do that." And guess what happens? Takes Ruth, and the course of nature happens, and she gets pregnant, and she gives birth to a son. And then the whole town hears about this. And what happens to this baby? Verse 16. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The woman lived there. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son." Moms, can you imagine how hard it would be to give birth and to give up your child to your mother-in-law, and she raises him, and that boy becomes her son rather than your son? That's commitment. But the joy. Naomi takes this son, and all the women say, "Naomi has a son." And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. What a sacrifice Ruth made that day by giving up her child. And yet that's exactly what the Lord has done for us. The Lord is so committed to us that his sacrifice for us has no limits. In fact, it took him from the comforts of heaven to come down here and live, to take on flesh, to become a man, and suffer through all that he suffered. And he did that for you and for me, because his commitment for us doesn't have any limits. Just like Ruth said to Naomi, no limits, no matter what. Christ invested in us. It cost him his very life. It wasn't simply his sacrifice on the cross. It wasn't simply the torture that he went through before that. It was his life of obedience, his sold out nature. I'm going to do what God wants me to do no matter what. But Christ risked everything when he died on the cross. He had no guarantee that you and I would ever believe. In fact, there are billions of people who will never believe in Christ, and yet Christ paid the full price for their sin already. But he risked. He said, you are worth it. You are worth it. You are worth it. He died risking everything. He put his whole plan in our laps. And through the power of the Holy Spirit, he carries that out in our lives. But it cost him everything. But oh, the joy. Oh, the joy when we see someone come to Christ, when we see their lives transformed. Wow. The joy that brings just here in this life. And I challenged you earlier, if you're someone who doesn't speak English as your primary language, that you know another language, to make a commitment, to step up and figure out how you as a group in this church can say, hey, let's do something that will affect the gospel in who knows how big a way. Pick up a translation. Figure out a way to do the subtitles in those videos. But more than that, I want to challenge each of us to make the commitment that's going to cost us something here in this body. That we risk getting to know each other even more. It's hard when people have left. Those of you who've been here, they leave, and what happens? We feel like we've lost part of ourselves. It's like hurts. Ouch, we had to say goodbye. But guess what? There's folks here now who are just arriving, and they're saying, I want to plug in. I want to, and it's a risk to say, I want to get involved. I want to get to know people. Well, I want both of those groups to take the risk, to commit to getting to know each other, to building a new family here. One that will weather the storms of life, that will provide you the support you need, that will be here through tough times and through joyous times. Will you pray with me?